Hello, everyone. Welcome to our panel discussion today about nurses, how health tech startups and consultants may benefit from cooperating with them. We have a fantastic group of speakers today, but before introducing them, please remember to mute the microphones. You will be able to ask questions at the end of the discussion, and you can also use the Slack channel to leave your questions, comments, and additional viewpoints to the community to discuss in the meantime. My name is Balint Bene, CEO of Bene Studio, and I will be the moderator today. My company does health tech mobile and web application development and design. Our goal with our work is to help product companies solve their technological challenges. Our panelists today are Bonnie Clipper, founder and president of Innovation Advantage, and Arlen Meyers, president and CEO, Society of Physician Entrepreneurs. And now, I would like to ask our panelists to briefly introduce yourself and share with us how are you contribute to the health tech ecosystem. Let's kick it off with Arlen.
Yeah, thanks for inviting me. So I'm Dr. Arlen Meyers, as was mentioned, the president and CEO of the Society of Physician Entrepreneurs. I'm located in Denver, Colorado. And essentially my portfolio at this point is, my first career was as an academic surgeon. I'm an ear, nose, and throat facial plastic surgeon and still am a professor at the University of Colorado School of Medicine and in business school. I made a transition, and now essentially my portfolio is teaching, but I teach innovation and entrepreneurship in various places. I consult to several companies, and I can get into that into more detail in the seminar. And as I mentioned, I run a global nonprofit, the Society of Physician Entrepreneurs. So thanks for having me.
Thanks, Arlen. So nice and colorful journey. And let's get to know Bonnie.
Hey, good morning. I'm Dr. Bonnie Clipper. I'm a doctorally prepared nurse. And I actually have a company that does consulting and coaching. So my journey is similar to Arlen's in that I practiced for a while as a chief nursing officer and then moved into innovation and technology, where now I do consulting to help organizations determine new models of care or tech-enabled care models, and also work with many CEOs of startup companies. So thank you very much for having me here.
Exciting journey, Bonnie. And let's continue with question. What is the role of nurses in health tech innovation and adoption? Bonnie, could you start as you are the most involved, I guess?
Yeah, absolutely. So here in the United States, there are over 4 million nurses, and internationally we number in the multi millions. So nurses outnumber any group of other disciplined healthcare professionals pretty significantly. The challenges that we have as nurses is that we often aren't trained on innovation processes or even the proper terminology. And if you were to ask any nurse how they care for patients, it's literally through a series of workarounds, because oftentimes our systems and processes get in the way or don't work as intended. So nurses are natural entrepreneurs, but we don't call ourselves that. We do a lot of MacGyvering, we do a lot of working around the system, and we do what we have to do to care for our patients. So giving nurses processes, terminology, and structure to actually help them think through how they can take their idea and turn it into something more substantial is very, very helpful for them. And continuing to kind of collaborate with all of the partners and team members in the healthcare ecosystem is also really essential and important for them.
Oh, it sounds really interesting, and it seems that nurses are an integrated part of the ecosystem. Could you mention an example for this MacGyvering or this entrepreneurial approach?
Yeah. Absolutely. And it happens kind of frequently where things just don't work the way that they were planned to work, or deliveries don't come up to the unit at the time they're expecting. So they'll have to send someone down to get the products. And oftentimes, I'll use that as an example, but we have systems in our hospitals that are intended to deliver medications for a certain time so they can administer them to a patient. So in some organizations that I've been in over the last couple of years, nurses will say, we know these deliveries from the pharmacy don't show up at the right time because it always takes them longer than it's supposed to. So what we've learned to do is actually send our own person down to the pharmacy and say that these people are going for surgery, even though they're not, so they can get the medications to take with them to bring them up to the unit and deliver them on time. That's just a really basic example of a process problem, but nurses have learned how to create workarounds in order to secure what they need to deliver the care to their patients.
It seems it's a really creative profession as well.
It is.
And yeah. And Arlen, what can you see from your perspective was the role of nurses in health tech innovation and adoption?
Well, I would expand the question a little bit, and I guess I frame this conversation in the context of interprofessional entrepreneurship. I mean, basically, we're talking about dentists, doctors, nurses, pharmacists, public health people, anybody that really has a healthcare or a sick care, what I call sick care background. So the issue and the reasons for that are many, not the least of which is in most places in the world, sick care is a complicated business. It obviously involves multiple people. Any doctor will tell you that probably their most important educator is a nurse. And pharmacy is getting into the game, retail pharmacy, CVS in the United States. So more and more, I guess my pitch would be, we need to promote interdisciplinary healthcare professional entrepreneurship. Now, the problem is, as Bonnie has already alluded to, all the healthcare professions, medicine, dentistry, nursing, pharmacy, public health, you name it, do not teach these skills to their students. So problem number one, and many of us are trying to fix this, but the basic, and it's particularly a problem around the world, but again, some places are trying to fix this. So number one, we need to do a better job of providing innovation and entrepreneurship education to healthcare professionals. I don't care who they are. And number two, I don't need to tell most of you that the healthcare professionals often don't play nice together. They play nice together when they have to on the floor and taking care of patients and teams. But frequently, there are turf wars, there are innovation silos, there are organizational barriers, particularly when you look at academic medical centers and College of Nursing and the College of Pharmacy and the College of Medicine. They really don't play nice together. So if I had to make a pitch, it would be, let's provide education in an interdisciplinary fashion or a transdisciplinary fashion to healthcare professionals. And number two, let's figure out ways to break down the innovation silos and play nice together.
Mm-hmm. And have you seen any good examples for such problem?
Yes, and I work with an organization that is developing international medical school curriculum reform models. And without going into the details, unless you want me to, there are many, many modules and what we call motifs. One of them is artificial intelligence, another is data science, another is innovation and entrepreneurship. It goes on and on and on. So, and we're doing this all over the world. I mean, we just recently had a conversation with a dean of a new medical school in China. So it happens, it's happening in several places in the United States and Canada and other places. So yes, it is happening. It's happening slowly. I will tell you that at the University of Colorado, there is a pharmacy entrepreneurship course. There are many medical nursing schools, and Bonnie can speak to this better than I can, that are teaching nursing entrepreneurship, or entrepreneursing, as they call it. ASU, Arizona State, is a good example. There's several other places that she knows better than I do, and maybe she can comment on that. But so little by little, it is diffusing through the healthcare professional education system, but we still have a long way to go.
And it often happens within a college, which means those students are the ones that take those courses. So I think, to Arlen's point, the opportunity here is really to broaden the tent and make this kind of learning interdisciplinary, because as we know, innovation can't be done in a silo. It's very collaborative. It requires different backgrounds and experiences. So the more that we can do this in an interdisciplinary manner, the better it is. And of course, even in doing so, at least in the nursing world, while we have tremendous insights around workflows and problems and patient and family dynamics, generally speaking, nurses are not trained in technology, artificial intelligence, using big data. So once they have an idea, then essentially they're completely at a loss and need to go out and start to import those kind of people to actually help them solve the problem, or create the device or gizmo or gadget or idea that they have in their brain.
Yeah, so we can say that that education is a must-have for nurses to have them being more influential within the digital world. And what I'm really curious about is have you seen any good examples, good practices which already there in terms of health technology and nurses?
Yes.
Yeah, absolutely. And as Arlen said, Arizona State has a great model. Ohio State has a great model. University of Pennsylvania has a great model. So there are more. There are some really good ones that are out there. And within the nursing realm, the challenge is that every state has a very specific requirement for the number of clinical hours and the number of didactic or learning hours that a student must have to graduate from an accredited school of nursing. So there's very, very, very little flexibility in terms of how they might shift any of the coursework. So the real challenge is, how do you get that content to nurses within the framework they have now in their curricula?
I would mention that education is the least, it's critical, but in my view, if you're gonna expect someone to get an idea to a patient, education, in my view, is the least important part of the equation. It's a necessity, but it's the least important. The others are, so you need education, yes. You need training, which is different than education. You need resources, networks, mentors, experience, peer support, and non-clinical career guidance. Very few of those, none of them, are really taught in the schools that we're talking about to any scale. So it really takes a lot more than just an online certificate to expect someone to really deliver a product. It just doesn't happen. Rarely it happens, but, and it speaks, and the point number two is, not only do healthcare professionals not play nice together, but the people who are listening to this webinar and healthcare professionals don't play nice together. I mean, techies are from Venus and healthcare professionals are from Mars. So we really need to do a better job. And that's part of the reason that I'm on this program. My plea is, we need to do a better job of figuring out how technologists, data scientists, I don't care what field of technology you're in, and healthcare professionals can work together. Because most technologists don't speak medicine. Most healthcare professionals don't speak tech. But you have to speak tourist, what I call tourist tech or tourist medicine, to understand the lay of the land. It's very common in artificial intelligence. in medicine. You don't have to know Python. You don't have to know how to create a convolutional neural network, but you have to understand what that means. I mean, what's the implication of that? Why would you do something like that? When you read an article in the literature that describes computer vision using artificial intelligence and retinal scans, how do you interpret that article? Does it have generalizability? Is it translatable to another population? Is it valid, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera? So I think we just have to do a better job of educating each other and creating the incentives to do it.
So it's a complex situation, and what I'm really curious about is what's the specialty of training nurses, like compared to training physicians or training other healthcare professionals? Bunny, what can you see? What can be that specialty? Which we have to be careful when we are designing a tool or a training for, especially for nurses?
Okay, so that's two different questions. One of them is that generally speaking, nurses are often trained to be generalists. However, that's not all encompassing. So depending on where you go to school and who your clinical partner is. So that means if you go to a school, a nursing school, let's use, for example, Arizona State, they have fantastic clinical partners there, right? So that means that those nurses that are in training have the ability to work closer and tighter with their hospital partners, their clinical partner, and will get integrated faster into that school and will likely move into specialties sooner because of that kind of partnership that they have. The same would be true at Ohio State or Penn, University of Michigan, a lot of these larger academic medical centers with schools of nursing that are their partners. So those are a little bit different. If you go to a smaller school of nursing and then move across the country to take a job at a hospital that you really want to work at, we really suggest that nurses start by getting themselves into a nurse residency program. That actually is going to give them more clinical time and also more learning time, because there are a lot of accredited programs with goals and objectives they have to learn. The real deal there is that when you come out and you're now a baby nurse and you're practicing nursing, it's important to start at that point developing these relationships, not only with physicians and with other disciplines, but also starting to use their brain and help them build trust across systems, and also learn to see who's out there that can help them advance their idea or leverage it. One of the things that's interesting, and Arlen, I believe physicians do not have the same constraints, at least to the same degree here, is that when nurses are hired by a hospital, they're an employee of the hospital. We've seen over the last 5 years that hospitals in their employee handbooks say that any ideas that you come up with or anything that you develop, essentially that intellectual property is owned by the hospital. So I actually have worked with several nurses that have quit their jobs so that the hospital doesn't take their IP, just so they can actually develop their program or their app or their model, whatever it might be, so that they own it themselves. That is something that's going to have to change. And I'm not sure, Arlen, to the degree that that's a problem for physicians due to that employee-employer relationship.
So the short answer is yes. The fact is that, I mean, it depends. Now we're talking about the United States. You're well aware that more and more physicians are becoming employed by large integrated delivery networks and hospitals. The latest number was 70%. I don't think it's that much. It's somewhere between 50 and 70% of roughly 1 million US physicians are employed by a hospital. So the number of, it's fair to say the number of employed physicians is increasing. And secondly, in most instances, and we could get into the weeds in this, but in most instances, if you invent or discover something using, quote, substantial university or employer resources, then generally you don't own the intellectual property. But there are a lot of ifs, ands, or buts, and we can get into that if you want to.
Yeah, thanks. And if we talk about the nurses' actual practices. What are the tools or technologies which they already use? Bunny, what's your experience on that?
Yeah, so again, there's a lot of generalities there, Balint. So if you think about it, you know, nurses, if we talk about inpatient nurses that work within hospitals, the primary thing that they lug around with them and spend so much time on is literally a computer on wheels. So they have a documentation station that has within it different platforms that they might use, whether it's for encrypted texting to providers or whether it's just documentation. We're also seeing, and this is kind of cool, but I'm hearing of more nurse practitioners that are beginning to use smart stethoscopes or devices where they can actually save and record heart and lung sounds, upload them as MP4s, document that way. But generally speaking, much of what we do in nursing is still pretty old school. All the tools are within the facility. If you're in home health, you literally would carry your tools with you. We're seeing remote patient monitoring certainly scale up. The pandemic has contributed to a large growth opportunity there. So we are seeing nurses staffing remote patient monitoring sites within healthcare systems around the country. Those jobs also are increasing in demand. So there is a lot of technology that continues to increase in its growth within inpatient facilities. Robotics, we're seeing more service robots that are beginning to do deliveries, which is a nice thing because it allows those humans to do other jobs. And in many cases, I'm working with some organizations that we're trying to encourage those humans to go back to nursing school since there's such a shortage. Artificial intelligence is now embedded within many different modules in the electronic health records, whether it's a pre-sepsis detection AI or whether it's a pre-lethal arrhythmia detection AI. We're seeing more of that. And again, nurses are struggling with, this stuff just came out. Do I rely on what this tells me? Or what if it's wrong? Do I rely on my own eyes and ears? So I think we're really trying to understand a lot about these systems, how they work, what the ethics of them is, and then how we can really leverage that in our nursing practice.
Oh, so the good news is that the day-to-day usage of technology is already established among the nurses, but we also can see room for improvement. And Arlen, what can you see how nurses and physicians can collaborate to make the healthcare more technology driven and more useful for the patients?
Well, I think we've sort of addressed that subject in terms of interprofessionalism and interprofessional collaboration, education, et cetera. But I would make the point that how healthcare professionals help technologists and vice versa, and by technologists I mean companies or people that lead them or co-founders, whatever, really varies. So, for example, are we talking about drugs, devices, digital health, care delivery, fintech, med ed tech, you name it? I mean, there's a pretty long list of parts to the ecosystem, and you can't be all things to all people. So you sort of have to pick your spot. The second point I'd make is that there's a big difference between the clinical mindset and the entrepreneurial mindset. And a lot of healthcare professionals, they're subject matter experts in their profession. I mean, Bonnie is an expert in nursing. I'm a so-called expert in what I do, et cetera. So working with a company or working with a founder as an advisor, consultant, chief whatever officer really is a lot. I mean, you could confine yourself to being a clinical subject matter expert, but not having an entrepreneurial mindset or not understanding the business of medicine compromises your value to the company. So it really depends on what you're trying to accomplish and what is the expectation. I mean, I'm sure Bonnie gets the same thing. I mean, I just got a text from a guy who says, we are inventing da-da-da-da-da-da, can we connect on LinkedIn and talk about it? Well, I mean, that's not useful. So it really depends on what you're trying to accomplish and create the expectation. That's why I think we need to do a better job of creating entrepreneurial educational facilities and universities, particularly nursing schools and medical schools. And I don't mean let's teach everybody how to create a company. What I mean is everyone who graduates should have an entrepreneurial mindset.
So
and that means, how do you create user-defined value through the deployment of innovation using a viable business model? There are lots of ways to do that. Yeah, because the only way we're going to get out of this sick care mess, and the mess is all over the world. The problem is an infinite demand for care with finite resources everywhere in the world. So particularly in the United States, we just do a much worse job than any developed country in the world. We spend the most and we get the worst outcomes. How do we fix that? And the irony is, you know what the #1 international entrepreneurial ecosystem in the world is? The United States. So if we're so good at being entrepreneurial and we have the least favorable health sick care system in the developed world, what's wrong with that picture?
Yeah, thanks, Arlen. It's a really important point. And now I would like to open up the floor for the questions. So please turn on your cameras, raise your hands physically, or use that tiny button, the hand button, or just write in the comments channel. Paul, maybe you have a question?
Yeah, thank you.
Great.
Balint, thank you very much, Arlen and Bonnie. Yeah, I was just reflecting. So my background is I'm a corporate lawyer based in Bristol, UK, and I deal with startups, have dealt with startups for a huge number of years, more than I now begin to care to say. I guess my reflection more than a question is just, you've put your finger on something really important here, which is problem solving. And if I reflect on some of the more interesting clients, entrepreneurs that I've met over the years, I don't think I'd realized that there is this thread. Nurses that have gone into recruitment, nurses that have gone into software development, pharmacists just recently dealing with one which he created a whole system of automated pharmacy dispensing. So yeah, fascinating that whole area. And I think you're right. When I think of education and let's say exploitation of intellectual property rights in the UK, I think there's the same issue there, which is the lack of joined up communication and ability to collaborate, not ability, you know, all those things that you were talking about that keeps people in these innovation silos. So I really just reflecting that the same issue that you're talking about applies equally in the UK. I think for where we live, Bristol, we have started something which I think is a very good model, which is something called, well, it's a place actually. It's called the Engine Shed. And there is where you can go from university to a little incubation space. It's not unique, this incubation space, but it works very well because it does bring in all those things that you talk about that you need. Now, I don't think there's, I mean, it's more for techies than it is for anything else, but that model has been followed by something called Unit DX. Now, Unit DX is a space, again, physical space, but it's doing for physicists and chemists what the Engine Shed was doing for statisticians, data analysts, and people studying maths, or math rather, as you would call it. So in other words, yeah, it's a process that's beginning, and whilst it isn't starting with healthcare, it's starting with it's starting with chemistry, which is obviously the root, if you like, of pharmacy.
Yes, thanks.
And I'll just finish very briefly. Sorry, because I'm going on a bit. They recently sold for over 800 million a medical care. This is out of Unit DX. So I do think things are happening, but I do agree there is a problem there.
Yeah, thanks,
Paul,
thanks, Paul.
And Paul, you mentioned something at the beginning there that I think is really insightful, and that is, as people are building, whether it's a company or advancing their work, looking to develop something, it's really important to make sure that the advisory boards contain the appropriate voices. So there are many times that it's a surgeon that's going to be utilizing the tool or the device, in which case it's important to get the input of surgeons, physicians that would participate on those advisory boards. I can't tell you the number of times, though, that people come to me to look at their platform, their device, their app, and they don't have a nurse on the advisory board. And nurses have a very different expertise than physicians. And I would say both of them are equally as important, but very, very specific and different expertise. So if you're doing something around healthcare and it involves gizmo, gadget, device, technology, app, make sure that you pull a nurse into those advisory boards and to help inform that work. They're closest to the patient, and their vantage point is going to be very, very different than that of the physician. So just think about that as you're creating companies or advancing your work.
Thank you, Bunny. Having a nurse advisor, it seems really practical and useful for any innovating companies. And Richard, would you like to ask something? Richard Brook?
I'm sorry about that. I got called in on a conference call. So, I think it's some interesting discussion, but I wasn't here for the last few minutes. Sorry.
Okay. No problem.
I would make a comment to, or George, you have go ahead. Ask your question.
Hey, Arlen. Hey, Bonnie. Really, really good to hear the chat there. And Balint, this is great. This is my first time in this this network. This is great. And funny enough, I'm also another person asking a question from Bristol. So I'm aware of the engine shared. I'm aware of Unit DX, and yeah, some really interesting thoughts there. So I've come into the health tech world after doing my master's in entrepreneurship. I was really lucky within my master's program, where we actually collaborated with a local NHS trust to identify needs around diabetes. And I come in from the perspective from the business avenue, but also the fact that I live with diabetes myself. So I was able to kind of share some thoughts there, and in turn, the university funded projects. Throughout this project, I've come out and realized that it's really difficult actually to kind of gain collaboration within space. So I've been working most recently with a doctor and an innovator within health technology to help build a membership platform to help businesses like me get connected with other people. So it's really in its infancy. So I'm coming to these talks to help understand how to be able to do this. So I guess my question to both of you is, how would you suggest somebody like myself, like I'm a patient in a lot of sense, I realize there's a huge gap in the market in some areas, but is linking the technologists up with the health tech professionals into one place, getting them essentially into one room and saying, look, how can we solve this problem? What would be your thoughts on that?
Bonnie, do you want to take that, or do you want me to start?
You can start, Arlen.
Okay. So that's a good, I mean, there's always the issue of the right fit. I mean, in many instances, this is like a dating service, and you're trying to find the right fit. And because you could go down a lot of rabbit holes if you don't have the right people on the team, to Bonnie's point, much beyond diversity. So I couldn't agree more with functional diversity, professional background diversity, demographic diversity, cognitive diversity. But there's another part to the diversity, which has to do with what is the expectation? So it starts with the why. Too many people are sort of like fumbling around looking for somebody else to help them, but they really haven't thought about, why do you want someone like me or Bonnie, for example, to be part of your team, or someone that's informed your thinking? So I think you have to have that conversation up front, because I can't deliver a lot of stuff you may want, or it's not something that I'm interested in, or it really doesn't bother. The problem you're trying to solve is not on my radar. So my first question I think you should ask yourself is, why are you doing this? And then there's the how question, like, okay, I think I understand why I'm doing this and what I'm looking for. Then how would I find somebody that's a good fit? And that gets to networking, mentors, resources, ecosystems. And it really is just about connecting dots. And the headline I would give you is, build your networks internally and externally, make them robust before you need them. Because you just never know where the next person is going to come from, and whether that person is going to be able to help you with everything from raising money to product development and design to marketing to et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And there's lots of places now, fortunately, where if you make the effort and reach out, you can find people. But the problem is, in my view, it's not a good fit because people don't take the time to figure out, do I have the knowledge, skills, abilities, and competencies to satisfy your needs? So I just see too much chaotic motion and frustration with people working together because they didn't do the homework up front. Bonnie?
Yeah, I would echo much of what you just said, Arlen. And for me, I like to understand, what problem are you trying to solve? And then what's your goal? Because there are a lot of people that come up with a problem that they're trying to solve, in which case then that provides a little bit of clarity. And maybe the goal is, hey, I want to get some help to create this thing, to make it available for free, or to create a company, or to sell it through a distributorship. Or I don't want to run a company. I just have this idea and I want to build this thing. So from my perspective, I just like to know, what do you think you're going to do with this? The other thing that I would say is, try not to fall into the trap of developing a solution that doesn't have a clearly defined problem. I can't tell you how many times people reach out to me and want me to do a demo of their solution. And when I ask them what problem they're trying to solve, it's not a real problem. And I've seen this happen in nursing world several times, where people will say, hey, can I show you this? And I try to afford people 15 minutes to say, okay, here's your time. Show me what you got. And they'll show me the thing, and it will be an app, or it will be a platform. And I'll say, what's the problem you're trying to solve? Well, this particular problem. How did you figure out that was a problem? Well, because we saw it here, or I had a visit to the emergency room and I saw this. Well, without really vetting your problem, you might completely be making it up. And then in which case you have a solution that's looking for a problem. That's not valuable. So I think it is important to make sure that you really understand the problem you're trying to solve, and then just kind of get a sense of, what is it you plan to do with this?
Yeah,
I call that be a problem seeker, not a problem solver.
Right. It's really good points, Bonnie and Arlen. So to summarize our discussion today, we can say that nurses are really important part of the HealthTech ecosystem and should be more integrated part in the future. And for that, we need more collaboration with physicians and entrepreneurs, and more education as well, especially with the with the digital and with the entrepreneur mindset. And now let's continue our session with the speed networking session. So thank you.